Welcome to Branding Room Only, the podcast where your personal brand gets a front row seat. I'm Paula Edgar, and if you're here, it's because you know your brand isn't just about what you do. It's about how people experience you. In each episode, you'll hear stories, strategies, and lessons from leaders and influencers who built their brands and made their mark. And I'll share the tools you need to do the same. Let's go. Hi, y'all. It's Paula Edgar, and welcome back to the Branding Room. I'm very, very excited about my conversation today with my guest. Let me tell you about her. You might be a little familiar. My guest today is Minda Harts, and she is a best-selling author, workplace equity consultant, and speaker. She is the author of The Memo and Right Within, and her new book, Talk to Me Nice. It focuses on building and repairing trust in the workplace. She is also a professor at NYU Wagner and a leading voice in advancing equity and leadership. And I'm excited to welcome her back into podcast and have a wonderful conversation about the intersection of trust and personal branding. Minda, welcome back to the Branding Room.
Happy to be back. Good to see you, Paula. Thank you again.
Good to see you too. All right, so let's jump into get back to know you questions because I want to see if anything's shifted since the last time we spoke about this. How would you describe yourself in 3 words or phrases right now?
That one is like you said, I like the right now. I would say flexible, trustworthy, and accommodating.
Okay. I love the trustworthy piece, getting into branding. Okay. Now, what is your current hype song?
You know, right now, you're not going to be surprised by this, Paula, but it is a Beyonce song, and it's it's Freedom with her and Kendrick, and you know, a winner never quits on themselves.
Yes, a good one, and you know, this is a Beyonce safe zone. All right, awesome. So, speaking of the these days directory or directive, what's a quote or mantra that you have been using or thinking about these days?
I know this might sound weird, but for the branding purposes, I'm going to actually quote myself.
I love it.
But it hits, trust shouldn't be a luxury.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I love that. What about this? If your brand had a trust soundtrack, what song would always be on repeat?
I would say Uptown Funk, Bruno Mars, and Mark Ronson.
You know, I was like, what song is she going to hit me with? Yes, you know what? I'm with it. I'm like, I'm with it. I'm also a Bruno Mars fan at all times, so it's all good.
Yeah, we need that Uptown. We need that reminding that we can have joy even when we are like, what do we do with our brand? We can always keep it moving, right?
Yeah, when the world is doing what it's doing, joy is the only thing that we can be consistent on for ourselves to make that our mantra, to make that our thing. So I love it as a reminder. Now, speaking of reminders, let's talk about your new book. Talk to Me Nice. I say it with my Brooklyn accent.
Thank
you. Why this book? Why now? And why do you think it matters, particularly in this moment?
What's funny, Paula, is when I pitched this book to Flatiron a couple years ago, I had no idea that it would sit in today's climate, right? Obviously, trust never goes out of style. We're always going to need it and want it. But I think we're craving it more inside the workplace and outside the workplace like never before. And I feel like a lot of us are just not trusting each other anymore. We're thinking the worst. And even with our brands, right? You see a certain thing, you automatically don't take things into consideration. You just kind of create a narrative that may or may not be true. And I think trust is one of those things that we want in our romantic relationships. We want in our platonic relationships. Why wouldn't we want it in our workplaces as well? And so this book is, there's no future without trust.
I mean, it's true. I know that this has been a part of the sort of ecosystem recently. And I, was saying to you before we started that I have seen your consistency in terms of talking about trust. And it's become, for me, a part of your personal brand. And so when I thought about this question, I thought to myself, How do you think that trust directly shapes a personal brand?
This is important. And I think I grappled with this for quite a while, because for those who knew me with my previous work with the memo and Right Within and some of that more equity focused work, I thought, well, what will people think of me when I start talking about trust? But I had to dig deep and say, you know what, Minda, your brand has always been trust. You were talking about trust for a certain demographic, and now you're saying, yes, and right. Yeah. And so it is congruent with what I've been doing. And so the brand is still, it's in its evolutionary phase, right, Paula? And so at the core of all the work that I've been doing is, how do we enhance trust with each other, and how do we oftentimes erode it? But when we erode it, how do we get trust back on the tracks? And for me, I realized that I have been authentic to myself, right? Because some people will say, they'll say to me, and I'm sure you hear it at times, oh, you pivoted. Well, no, really, I didn't. I just evolved the brand, really.
Yes. And brands are supposed to evolve, right? As we evolve, as the world evolves, as things that are priorities within workplaces and personally evolve, it's not supposed to stay static. It's supposed to stay consistent. And I think that's what you said. And so, yes. And when things are inconsistent or erratic, right, folks are unable to trust that brand. And so I love how you laid it out, and really thinking about the reflection of what happens when you try to pivot to something else. Pivoting is okay. It's fine as long as you have a through line. And I think the through line to the work that you've done is that people feel connected to you. That friend in your head thing is definitely a thing. And so I'm glad you laid it out the way that you did. It makes a lot of sense. Something else that you said is we're in a workplace communication crisis. I think we're in a communication crisis, but definitely a workplace communication crisis. What does that look like in practice? What does that mean?
Yeah, over the years, I've had different people say to me, and you've probably heard people say it too, is I don't trust my manager. I don't trust my colleague. I don't trust HR, right? That's a big one. And I started to think about what they weren't saying, what was underneath the reason why they no longer trusted. And what I found was that there was this expectation that wasn't being met, that the other party may or may not know is eroding the trust, right? Because trust is not always the big gargantuan moments, right? The layoff or the reorg. It's sometimes those quiet moments that go unsaid, that we sweep under the rug, right? And you're not going to know necessarily that you eroded trust with me, not intentionally, but because we are very conflict adverse, that it's really not that I may not trust you. I just have to communicate that this is what trust looks like for me, and it may look different for you. And now that we know that, we can close this expectation gap. So for me, it's less of a trust issue and more of a communication breakdown.
Expectations has been something that has been in conversation for me this week in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, particularly in therapy. And one of the things that my therapist said recently was that we get ourselves in trouble when we have expectations and don't communicate them, because then it's a one-sided conversation. And if the other person doesn't know, then how are they able to meet? Then you have to give them the opportunity to meet. And that's exactly what you just said. And so I'll tell her that I got another double click on what she said.
Listen, you got a good therapist, Paula. You got a good therapist.
This far, she saves lives every day. Trust me. So speaking of trust, tell me about this. What is this framework of the 7 trust languages? And do you think that most people lean on one primary language in terms of their trust language?
So I'm glad you asked that. For me, it's a couple of things. So quickly, if you don't mind, I'll just run through what the trust languages are, just so we have a baseline. But the 7 trust languages really quick are transparency. That's the clarity and honesty. Security. That's the intellectual, psychological, and emotional safety and belonging. Demonstration is doing what we say, the behavior. Feedback is meaningful and consistent insight. Acknowledgement is seeing people and their work. Sensitivity is being mindful of our impact and behaviors. And lastly, follow through, keeping our word. And so those are the 7. And I realized when people were talking to me about what was missing or why they didn't trust someone, it was falling in one of these 7 buckets. And so I'll pause there.
Yeah. So thank you for laying that out for us. The second part of the questions was, do you think that people lean on one more than the other? And that's as you were laying them out, I thought to myself, Right now, don't you think, and well, let me ask you, do you think sensitivity that's what came out to me, but maybe I'm just sensitive. But that just came out to me because I think there's a lot going on, particularly in the workplace right now, where people don't trust, and that folks are sensitive themselves, but also not thinking about how what their impact is in a lot of places too.
Yeah, so in the book, the nice thing is people can take the assessments on what their primary, secondary, and tertiary, but as a whole, as a community, I do believe that security, the language of security, is probably one of the most important trust languages today. So we are on the same page there, because this is essentially the empathy, right? Like, for example, if you're my manager, Paula, and you live on the East Coast and I live on the West Coast, and you see that there's a wildfire taking place, you may not know exactly where that wildfire is, but you know that it's probably not far from me. And instead of doing our year in review on Zoom, you're going to say, you know what, Minda, I just saw the news cycle. Are you safe? Are you okay? Let's do you need anything from us? Let's pause our year in review till a little bit later, and let's check in. That's being sensitive, right? That's going to usher in trust, not saying, hey, listen, we got to get this done, get to the nearest Starbucks immediately. Let's finish this up, right? Just because
we got deadlines.
You figure it out, right? Nobody told you to move to LA. We experience those type of colleagues and managers every day. And our behavior at that moment could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I think we have to ask ourselves, do I have the right to say this to this person? Have I earned this, right? And what I'm about to say, is it going to enhance that trust or erode it? And that's going to be pivotal in our relationship going forward.
Yeah, I love that framework. I think most of the people who listen to the podcast and folks in my sphere know that my mother was killed on September 11th. And one of the things I remember most about Sage Software, I always name check them, because as an employer, when 9/11 happened, they wrapped themselves around me. Like it was a national experience, but it was a personal experience for me. And I'll never forget that my manager was like, whatever you need. And for me, I needed to be at work, right? I needed to stay busy because you couldn't travel. And they were just like, I was sitting there just essentially waiting for phones to ring, et cetera. But and that makes me a brand loyalist. I don't work there anymore, obviously, but this is all these years later. But I always say, it is important to remember, like people always say like, oh, we're like family, but that's not always the case. And there's family members I don't trust. Let's keep it real. However, when you demonstrate that people first and people forward and empathy, it creates people who want to stay, who want to be and to speak well about their experience, even when they're not there anymore. And I think it's a powerful thing. Powerful thing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that is so important, because what you did there, Paula, was they spoke two languages, right? They were sensitive and they also demonstrated. And if certain things kind of fell through the cracks, they put enough trust coins in the bank so that you can hold on to that when maybe times were a little rocky, right? And I think that's so important. And that's realizing that you're a human first, employee second.
Yeah. Speaking of which, can you share an example of a trust violation? Like something that will damage not just the relationship, but also potentially somebody's reputation?
I mean, what we're talking about is credibility, right? I mean, this is credibility. And you talk a lot about that on your podcast, is that brand credibility. So if, for example, I think in the workplace, many of us are working hybrid, or we do business hybrid. So if I'm on an all staff meeting and I see that your camera is off, I'm not going to assume that you're in Tahiti working, right? That's it. Nobody's working anymore. Your green button is not on. I'm just assuming the worst. And I think those are trust violations that we don't even, AKA, it's somewhat of a micromanaging thing, right? And that's one of the fastest ways to erode trust. Instead of saying to you, Paula, I wanted to check in with you because typically on our calls, you have your camera on, and I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Do you need anything, right? I'm not going to assume that you're in Tahiti, right? I'm not going to assume. I'm going to check in. And I think that's something that we don't do anymore. We don't take things into consideration. We don't give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think those are the moments where we erode trust because we're assuming, right? We're assuming that we have all of the information. And I think what people don't always understand is that trust isn't just nice to have, but it's also good for the bottom line, right? We're more productive, we're less anxious, more retention when trust is present. So I think these violations, they don't serve the company and they don't serve the team morale.
Yeah. I'm thinking about, the first thing you said in terms of languages was also transparency and lack of transparency, right? Because if you feel as if somebody is not telling you something that they could, it definitely is going to erode trust. But I know that there's times when you've been, as a manager, as a boss, as an owner, you can't tell everything, right? But I think it's even important to be able to demonstrate and say, I can't tell you everything. You understand that in this role I can tell you, but I'm going to tell you as much as I can to keep, right? To kind of toe the line of trying to appear as transparent as possible and to be authentic in that versus, a lot of people leave just based on the cloak and daggerness, not necessarily the actual thing people were not being transparent about. And I was just reflecting on when you said, I was like, yeah, it is. You can also, this can be a relationship book too. Like you can take this into marriage counseling as well. Like I need to know all the things as much as I can in order for us to be in relationship with each other appropriately.
Yeah. I mean, you hit it on the head. And I think right now people are craving that sensitivity. They're craving transparency. Again, it's also saying, I don't know everything. And when I have more information, I'll follow up with you. But if you have any questions, feel free to connect with me because people don't want you to talk down to them. They don't want you to act like they're dumb. Like, the smoke is coming out of the chimney, but there's nothing to see here. You can acknowledge. You can acknowledge. Yeah, I know it's tough right now. I know there's a lot of changes. I can totally understand why you might feel the way you do. But right now we're trying to figure things out, but just give us a little more time so we can come back and have a better conversation. That's going to settle your nervous system, and trust is still going to be a main character with that, right? As opposed to keeping everything under wraps and all this ambiguity. People can't work like that.
Yeah, at least that safety piece you were talking about, right? We want to feel safe, even in the inconsistency or the lack of information. You still want to feel as safe as you can. Now, until the robots take us over and we're still human and humans are going to make mistakes, right? So when somebody violates trust, it can be a brand ding. It can stick to your brand. What are some of the ways you think that particularly managers in the workplace can begin to rebuild trust when it has been broken?
I love this question because you hit it on the head. We're all humans. So we are going to erode somebody's trust. Again, it may not be intentionally, but we have to acknowledge where we may have gave information based off of the information we had at the time. That's how we made the decisions. And now that was not the right decision, I'm going to come to you and say, hey, with this new bit of information I have, I apologize that, it may have eroded trust. Want to work toward getting back to a harmonious place. Again, that's going to feel better to me. And I'm going to say, you know what, I could trust this person because they've acknowledged where the breakdown happened. They're willing to demonstrate and show that consistency that trust is still a main character in the room. And I think that's what people want, right? Because we also know that trust is going to break down and we want someone to give us another chance to try to demonstrate what that looks like, right? Because again, we are going to have those moments, maybe using language that we used to use that you're not using anymore, right? All those different things that happen because our world is evolving, language is evolving. And so pretending that I'm not making a mistake or calling you the wrong name every time I see you now because I don't want to say it, I'm going to avoid you in the break room. That's not okay, right? That's saying, you know what? You're going to give me a little more props for trying to say Minda as opposed to ignoring you, right? And I think, again, there's all these little moments that erosions take place, and we have to ask ourselves, is this an opportunity for growth? And how would I want somebody to engage with me? And I think we forget that human piece oftentimes with trust.
Yeah, I think the first part in all of that, what you said, is it's accountability, and oftentimes with power and with title, folks think that they don't have to be accountable to certain people, and I think that sets you up for a lack of trust. And having humility and being able to say I messed up, and I'm going to try to do better as I go forward. That's a people skill, definitely a management skill, absolutely a leadership skill that we should all be trying to demonstrate. I asked my son yesterday, I said, what's the word that you think mommy says all the time? And he's like, I cannot be that. I was like, that's right. That's correct. I say accountability because we need to be accountable as human beings because we are going to make mistakes. We've got to acknowledge them and try to do better as we go forward. So speaking of the do better, thinking about on the individual perspective, like what's the first step that someone can take if they want to demonstrate trust and credibility? What are some of the things you think that they should be doing first?
Yeah, I think part of it is if you work with other people, and most of us do in some capacity, is to say, what do you need from me to do your best work while you're
Oh,
here?
oh,
Right?
that's a great question.
That's going to open up the door to, and they may not know what the trust languages are, but they're going to say one of those things, a few of those 7 trust languages without necessarily knowing it. Or, I really value our relationship and I want to make sure that we're, at the top of the trust scale. What more do you need from me? Right. That's again going to open up that space. And then if they're a good human being and a good colleague, they're going to say, you know what, thanks for asking. What do you need from me? And now we're going to be able to close this expectation gap. And you might find, okay, Paula told me that she needs more clarity and honesty. She needs me to be a little more transparent. Now that I know that, I can do that, and trust is going to beget trust, right? And then maybe I tell you that, hey, I actually need more feedback after we finish a project. Is that something we can work on, that we can calendar a conversation right after we finish that sprint? Now that I need that, where trust is the center, we can have a better working relationship. And I think that that's what we need. We need the tools to be able to communicate better with each other, even when we have to have tough conversations. I can still keep your humanity and my dignity intact. Right?
Yeah. It's so true. When I've done like inclusive communication sessions, I often, remind people that we don't have one communication style, right? And particularly when you are managing or leading teams, that you have to think about what each individual needs, right? And that is the hardest piece. And so I'm thinking about this in this perspective too, understanding what their trust language is and how you have to modulate communication for each person in order to bring out the best of them for the relationship. That's hard.
It takes work. Trust takes work, right? Trust takes work.
It does. And perhaps I think when folks are thinking about some of these things that people think about as soft skills, which I think are concrete skills that we need in order to evolve and also to have a good brand and be regarded well, it is hard. It's not supposed to be easy. It's work for a reason, right? But I think being intentional can make it so much more or less fraught, right? Than we kind of make it to be. People complain all the time about all that they have to do. And it's like, but it's also the people on the other side, all that they have to be, and how do we come together to do and be harmoniously? I love this framework. I love this framework.
Thank you.
All right. So we're sitting here. You're in LA. I'm in New York City. We are defining what has happened for us since 2020, which is the hybrid is here to stay. What are some of the things that people can do to signal that they are trustworthy when you're not in the same room? Like sometimes you can feel like, I got the right feeling, but when you're not in the same room, are there some skills and ways that you can demonstrate that you are trustworthy and that you want to build trust in a hybrid format?
Yeah, this is a great question because vibes can only take us so far.
Exactly.
Okay. So I would say the trust language of follow through is probably going to be key here. And that's that consistency in doing what we say we're going to do, because here's the reality. We can't just always go walk down the hall to your cube, to your office and say, hey, can I get that Johnson document, right? So if I tell you on email or, on the phone that I'm going to get that to you by 5:00 and now it's 8:00 and now it's the next day, I'm not going to trust you that you're able to deliver on the things that you said you're going to deliver on, right? And if that's a consistent theme with you, I'm going to start to create this narrative that you're not trustworthy, right? I can't depend on you. Therefore, your credibility when you tell me you're going to do something, or one of those people, maybe one of us are those where we say yes to everything and we know we have too much on our plate. Our intention is to do the thing, right? But every time we say yes to something, then we can't close the loop we're eroding trust with somebody and they're side-eyeing us, right? But also following through is also saying, back to your accountability piece, is saying, you know what, I thought I could get this to you at 5. I'm looking at my schedule now. Could I get 2 more hours to finish that? Would that be okay with you? I'm closing the loop with you so that you could still see me from a trustworthy standpoint, right? That you're like, okay, well, I appreciate that they followed up with me, right? That's better than ghosting me or keeping me on workplace read, right? So I think I think that it's important for us to keep our word, right? And I think that's all we have sometimes when we're working globally. And so you'll appreciate your word is your bond, right? We used to say that a lot. And I think follow through is going to be important, especially also managers, right? If you tell your direct reports that we're going to have a conversation about compensation in our next one-on-one, and now you keep canceling the meeting because you don't want to have the conversation, I'm also going to create a space to say, I can't trust them. They're not committed to my upward mobility, which may or may not be true, right? But if you can't have the conversation, or based off of the current climate, right now, we won't be able to talk about the compensation. Can we talk about this in about 6 months? I can trust you a little bit because now you're at least following through on the things that you said. And I think that goes a long way with our colleagues, especially when we don't see each other physically day to day.
What I just pulled from that, I'm like, the trust is in the follow through, like that it really is in how you're demonstrating, how you're being consistent, and how you're like making sure the communication is not leaving them on workplace. But definitely should be that should be a t-shirt. In this, we're talking about this hybrid place that we're in. There's also a portion of this that really has to do with cross-cultural connectivity too. Right. I have a good friend and she works for a company that is Asia based. And she's like, there are things that I have to do virtually that I don't have to do virtually with folks within the United States because it is looked at as respect or disrespectful. And so this is a really important framework, I think, in even thinking about it being an inclusive leader. And so I love that you've put this resource together that can be used in so many different ways. It's just fantastic. Now, we're living in a terrible world right now. Sorry. We have AI, we have misinformation, we have fake news, and a lot of that is shaping so much of what we see. Why do you think that because of that framework and because of everything that we have going on, that is even more important now to intentionally be building trust, both one-on-one and in team relationships?
Yeah, let's be honest. Your company might put a mandate out that completely erodes trust to some degree, right? Or making decisions that you don't have any clarity, you don't have any honesty. But on a micro level, we still can make trust the catalyst on each and every one of our teams, right? Manners can still exist. Humanity can still exist, right? And I think it's important, even more so, probably transparency is like the second most important language, I think, because if AI is a tool that we're going to use, it's important that we have some clarity around that, right? To also say that we're going to make sure that we're upskilling so that you aren't left behind, right? There's still a place for you at this company. I'm not going to just let you be fearful all day long while we talk about all these things, right? Because again, that's going to prohibit you to be productive and be your best at work. And I think because we're so conflict adverse, Paula, we don't want to have the tough conversations, but people, Jack Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. We can handle the truth. We want the truth, right? Yeah. That's going to help us make better decisions for ourselves, but also for our workplaces. And so I think now is the time where we get to reset and we get to make trust part of the equation because there's so much going on. And again, no workplace is going to be successful without that human connection. And we have to take away that ambiguity and keep doing things that erode trust. So I believe that this is an opportunity for each of us. Trust is a choice. And we get to choose that each and every day, even as the workplace is evolving. I mean, look at the Industrial Revolution, right? There's always going to be a time for evolution, but we could still make trust at the center and keep it the nucleus.
I love that. I love the trust is a choice. And, as we were thinking a couple of times in this conversation, you have said, that people are conflict averse. And it's so true. I think that we have a problem when it comes to being passive aggressive in the workplace and people considering passive aggressiveness as nice.
Yeah.
right? Versus being kind and direct and be right. And because passive aggressiveness makes people not trust you. Right. And so I love that it's talk to me nice. It's really talk to me nice and talk to me kind. And so that we can trust each other. Right. Like, so
Yeah.
that, clearly I'm triggered because I'm thinking about my passive aggressive bosses that I had. Anyway.
I mean, but you said it, Paula, like this.
Yeah.
I have so many people who are writing me and saying, I know you wrote this for the workplace, but this is actually, I'm using it with my kids too, because I need to show up in a way that they hear me, that they see me, right? And that I see them. And I think that this is important because at the end of the day, we all just want to be trusted, right? But trust doesn't just happen because we click our heels 2 times and bring our title into the room, right? Trust has to be demonstrated. And we get to decide what type of leaders we want to be going forward.
Yeah. I love that you brought the context in of parenting because, in any relationship, like to your point, trust is a bedrock of whether it goes well or not. And, I come from the parenting of you do what I say because I tell you to say it. And as I look and think about how I have evolved as a person and a parent, a part of it has been to, like, I don't know, ask my kids what they think, which was not a part of, I didn't have that.
Yeah.
I'm always like, how lucky you are.
So lucky.
but it's a part of the demonstrating trust in all of the different capacities. I can see so many different uses for this. I was just, as you were talking about upskilling in the AI context, I thought about this in trust. When you have, 6 generations in the workplace, it's such an important piece because, the insert gen here and insert gen over here, there's a lack of trust because they're not communicating in the same way and they haven't been, right. And so this is I cannot wait for people to hear and be more a part of this because I can see it leverage in so many different ways. This is so key. All right. Allyship. Part of how people think about showing up in places, being, hopefully it's not Throwback Thursday on allyship, but wanting to be an ally and wanting to show up in a way that's trustworthy and authentic. And how I want to think about in a leadership perspective, how can leaders make sure that their brand is not performative in terms of being perceived as performative and allyship, but really grounded in an authentic trust?
Yeah, I think that's important because I think trust has been eroded in many spaces and places because of the performative action, right? We thought because they said X, that must mean that this is going to happen. And now we see that it hasn't. And so so I think the language of demonstration, the behavior, right, around it, it's the show and the tell. I'm not going to just keep doing the tap dance, but you don't see any there. And I think that's what people want. If I say that women are important in this environment in the workplace, we value women leaders, but you see that our last 7 hires have been men, that's not demonstrating that our values align with what we say we are, right? And so now as a woman who's been in your management training program, I'm not seeing the progression. I'm not going to trust that maybe this is a space for me. But here's where trust is so beautiful, Paula. If you notice that we did say that, so a leader comes up and says, you know what, we did say that we want to make sure that we have 50-50 parity and we have not done a good job of that. Here's what we're doing to rectify that, right? As someone in the community, who identifies as a woman, I'm going to say, wow, I appreciate our CEO calling a spade, right? And here's what they're doing to put us back in. It's the demonstration. It's allowing me to see that the next hire in the C-suite is a woman, right? And that feels good for me. And I think that we have to demonstrate, even if we've made a mistake, because we are, it's the demonstration, it's the behavior. Can we do something different? Is there a policy or a procedure that can demonstrate that what we say our values are align with that? And I think each and every one of us can do that day to day, right? I don't need to know what your trust language is, Paula, for me to demonstrate what trustworthy should look like.
I love how you laid that out. And I'm just thinking about, what's happened even in this past year where organizations, retrenched and decided to pivot given what was happening in the world. And, for those of you who are in the United States, a lot of things change. But as I think about this question, leaders can still, even if the enterprise has shifted in terms of what they're saying or what their commitments have been, leaders can still be impactful. Like this is where sponsorship and good leadership can come in and that, on an individual, and then hopefully that becomes a part of the culture, even if what is being said from the top is not the same as it was before. I think that that's really where we have to rely on, because clearly that a lot of places and spaces are prioritizing money and other things versus people. But I want people to listen, who are listening, thinking about this framework, and that they can use this themselves to be the leader that they wanted and that they should be, despite all of the other pieces that are happening.
Yeah. Can I add to that, Paula? Because
yeah, please.
You inspired me when I'm thinking about this. For example, let's say that in the new year, we'll be celebrating, Women's History Month, or in some places, Black History Month, or whatever have you, whatever the celebration is for that month, mental health, right?
Yeah.
This is an opportunity, even if the company isn't celebrating as a whole as it once did, to say to everybody who may identify as one of those groups, say, hey, I just want to let you know you're valued here. You're part of the team, no matter what is going on in the world. Thank you for your contributions. That's going to sit well with me and be like, okay, I can trust this person that I report into because they see me, right? They're not pretending that there's, nothing to see here. And I think that goes a long way. And that's something, again, trust is a choice. We don't have to wait for the $1 million initiative to come down the pipeline to say somebody's name in the room that they're not in, right? To give them an opportunity, another bite at the apple. And that's something that each of us can usher in trust. And hopefully that'll trickle down to the rest of the departments over time.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. All right. So we talked all this trust stuff. I want to ask you some personal things.
Let's do it.
Who is on your personal trust squad? Are there 2 or 3 people that you turn to no matter what?
I know it probably sounds really cliche, but in the current climate, God, I'm going to him.
100%.
I'm like, Lord, deliver us from all this evil. Okay.
that part.
But I would say that people, and I think it sometimes changes who my top 8 are, but I think that those who demonstrate to me, and I will say this, I know that I can always go to my mom, right? With certain conversational topics that she can, or I can go to a brother or my dad. I do lean on family for things because they know me in more intimate ways than other people do. And so I do value that. But then also there's people in my past life that I worked with that still serve as mentors and sponsors. And so, and podcasts like yours, those trusted places where I'm going to get the information and the resources to be my best self.
Yeah. This essentially, your trust squad is like your personal board of directors, right? It's the people who that you can rely on and that you can go to, that are going to tell you the truth, and that you're going to be able to trust their perspective, and that they care about you and your outcomes and the ways in which you're navigating that. And for branding, who you have in your squad is like one of the most important pieces in terms of making sure you stay consistent to who you are, and then also to help lift you as you're continuing to go. So I wanted all of you to remember and make sure that we put this in the show notes, that personal board of directors framework is a really important one in thinking about this. And I thought about this in terms of this trust, the who I trust. I have like my layers, my personal board of directors. I'm like, okay, you're now an advisory, but you're current for this year because these are the goals that I have.
Absolutely.
So what about this? You are a hip hop fan. We have that in common. If you had to name one hip hop artist whose brand screams trustworthy, who would it be and why?
That's a really good one. Now that this may be unpopular or popular opinion, Paula, I don't know.
Go for it anyway.
But what I will say is Pharrell Williams. I think that Pharrell has been very consistent with his brand, right? I remember when I was in high school and but it's evolved, right? He's still that skater boy, but elevated, right? He still is giving us Louis Vuitton and the t-shirt, right? You still, you can trust that he's going to amplify the old and bring in the new. And I like how he's a bridge connector. And I think that's what's important about trust, right? And generationally, I think he brings people to the table. And so I appreciate how he shows up with his cultural influence.
this was like one of the questions. I was like, okay, let's see what she says. I think that's a perfect person. When I thought about this, the first person, like the only person that came to mind for me was Queen Latifah.
Yeah, that's a good
And
one.
I was like, it was like she came in front of me like, I am the person who is trustworthy. And I thought to myself, well, she's queen. I could see her in the little hat, right? Like, so in terms of consistency.
She is. I think we all trust Queen Latifah, right?
That part. She's also the equalizer, so there's that. Okay, well, how about this? Lots of celebrities, brands have taken hits. Is there somebody who comes to mind when you think of a celebrity whose brand took a hit from a trust violation? And what do you think there's one thing they could have done to rebuild it?
I typically don't like to name a name, but I can name a name because I've written about this person in my book. But I would definitely say Kanye West. And I think his brand has taken a hit. And, I grew up in Chicago, so I can also say that this is, it hurts because this was somebody who I think was very culture forward at one particular point, and they've totally, skewed the opposite way. And I think it's hurt their brand in ways that it'll take a long time to rebuild for sure.
Yeah. I remember when everything was happening during the pandemic and, with COVID and vaccines, et cetera. And I remember several hip hop people came out and were like, don't take the vaccine. And I was like, oh no, how can I listen to your songs? I'm trying to stay safe. And so, it also makes me think about the fact that you can have a really consistent and strong brand, and then you can do one thing. You can say something that will totally shift someone's perspective on you, based on them realizing what your values are that they didn't have access to before. So
if not for nothing, I'm kind of glad, even though I know it's like kind of a crazy, chaotic time, but that we get to learn about people's values in alignment, because I think we support a lot of people and we don't know what they think in a lot of different ways that's not congruent to our values. Right?
It's so true. And values is like a core piece of how I think we connect on values, right? And that's where that trust comes in. And, one of the things that I asked, and I asked you in the first time you were on the podcast, is like, what is that unshakable thing that you will never compromise on? And it's in alignment with trust. Right? It's like, right, that you want to be somebody who is going to be dependable. So my last question for you, I can't believe this time's gone by so quickly, is, you always talk about, and I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, that you're like somebody's workplace best, you're a friend in their head. Who is that friend in your head that you have, even though you may not have met them personally?
I recently met this person, and they were a friend in my head, and I still kind of see them that way. But I would say Kim Scott, the author of Radical Candor, because I think that what she did was kind of revolutionize how we can be more direct with our feedback, but in a way that still upholds dignity. And I love how she shows up with her brand. If you've ever seen her speak, she kind of has a uniform and all these different things. And she definitely was a friend in my head, and we've become, friendly in real life. And so, and her brand is on point with meeting her, right? They say never meet your heroes, but I do believe that if trust and the values are there, then you should always meet your heroes.
Oh, yeah, no, I love that. That's a perfect soundbite. In thinking about this for myself, I thought I have a whole tribe of friends in my head. Oprah, obviously somebody comes towards me quickly, but truthfully, in this past year since I've read this book, and Mel Robbins has been a friend in my head. I'm like, let them, do them, stop them, everybody them, because I think I told you this, I love, because I have ADHD, I like to read and listen to people on audiobook. And it's one of the ways in which I began to think of you as a friend in my head, because I listened to you with both of your books. And for me, Mel Robbins is that way as well, because I was like, yeah, exactly. Like just saying it the way that I would say it too.
For sure.
It really does help build this. And so I am really, really pleased that you've written this book. I cannot wait for everybody to get their hands on it. All of you, go tell a friend, especially the one you know is not trustworthy, that they need to read this book. Minda, tell everybody how they can stay in contact with you and let them know about all the things that you are doing.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for seeing me and trusting me to come back on. I'm glad that my values still align with yours, so that we're on the right track. But find me me on LinkedIn, follow me,
Yeah.
bring me in to talk about the 7 trust languages. I created an interactive game that goes along with industry focused on how to assess what languages work best that get us closer to a more trusted outcome. And I believe that trust is on the horizon for all of us. And again, trust is a choice. So find me on LinkedIn, go to mindaharts.com.
Fantastic. Minda, as wonderful as you always are, you continue to impress, continue to build my trust in you. Thank you for spending some time in the branding room. And everybody, like I said, tell a friend to tell a friend and stand by your brand. Bye, everybody. That's it for this episode. Appreciate you hanging out with me on Branding Room Only. Now, please do me a quick favor. Head over to ratethispodcast.com/branding so more people can join this conversation. And make sure to stop by paulaedgar.com/events to see what's next. Whether I'm live, online, or in person, I'd love to see you there. See you next time in the branding room. And until then, stand tall, shine bright, and always stand by your brand.